Hi, this is Miss McGee, and we're going to cover the causes of the witchcraft hysteria in Salem, Massachusetts in 1691 and 1692. If at any point this is going too fast, remember you can always pause and write down the notes, or you can also rewind and re-listen to some of the things that we're going to cover into the hysteria in Salem. Okay, first of all, the way that all this started is in the winter of 1691 and 1692. Some girls from the Salem village were playing in the kitchen of the village minister. His name is Samuel Parris, and so one of his daughters is playing with these girls, and what they're doing is they're practicing fortune telling, trying to discover who their future husbands are going to be. And while they're playing with these dolls and ideas, someone claims that they see a coffin, and as soon as they do that, the village minister, Samuel Parris, his daughter, Betty, gets what's called the fits. And that's how the girls described her reaction, and later there are some adults who come and witness Betty's fits, which means she's basically going into convulsions. She's acting like she can't talk and things like that. Three of the other girls who are playing with them, they get the same symptoms. And so this is how the narrative starts with why there was an outbreak of witchcraft in Salem, Massachusetts. So everyone in the village is wondering what is wrong with the girls. And their parents insisted that they get examined by doctors, and because they can't come to any conclusion about what the source of these problems are, they determined that maybe the reason they're having these fits is because they're being bewitched. And so they decided to resort to an old wives' I guess you would call it recipe, and they make witch's cake. And in the cake, what they do is they mix rye and urine samples from those who are exhibiting these crazy fits, and then they feed this to the dogs, and then they watch the dogs and see what sort of reaction the dogs have to the witch's cake. And so if the dogs react the same way, they assume that it's the bewitchment that is causing all these problems with the girls. And so what in fact actually happens is once they start with the witch's cake, more people have fits, there's an increased fear within the village over the fact that there are witches among them. And so parents start interrogating their children, asking what sort of role they had with the original mischief that had happened in the minister's kitchen, or if they have had ever experienced any sort of episodes with being bewitched. And so the girls who are originally in the village minister's house start naming names of people who they think have possibly bewitched them. And so the first names that pop up are Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne, and Tituba, who is the slave of Minister Parrish, and the same woman who was called upon to bake the witch's cake. Now, Tituba claims that she is a witch, and some speculate that whether the reason that she claimed that she was a witch is because the village minister was upset with her being among the girls when they were doing this fortune telling, and her using old I guess you would call it like stories and recipes and like ways to conjure messages from her old homeland and her home native culture and bringing it to them, causing the kids to be scared. And so she had been possibly severely beaten by the village minister, and so in order to avoid being hit anymore, she claimed that she in fact was a witch, and that there were also 4 more witches and wizards within the village to capture. And so because of Tituba's remark, more girls are listing names of possible witches within the village, and Salem feels that they have to take action right away. And so some of the things that they do to determine whether or not someone was a witch is they go out into homes and they look for voodoo dolls and witches' marks. A voodoo doll is any sort of object that they find in the home that could be possibly used within spells to hurt another person within the village. And then a witch's mark is, you can see from this picture from the time period, they would try to find a mark on a woman or a man's body as a place that the devil would feed upon that person. Typically, these are just going to be birthmarks or moles that are commonplace on almost any person, but they use this as evidence that, in fact, this person was in cahoots with the devil. Other types of evidence against people would include what's called mousiphone, which means that if you had an altercation with somebody, they could have possibly cursed you or any of your belongings. And so there were people in Salem who accused somebody of being a witch, and their proof was that after an altercation, basically a yelling match between the two, the next day their prize-winning pig had ended up dying. And there's no reason that the pig would have died except for the fact that someone probably put a curse on it. So it's not hard evidence against anybody. And one of the most troublesome pieces of evidence against someone, it was called spectral evidence. And this is basically vision of specters or ghosts or visions of things. And the problem with spectral evidence is that only the victim of the specter could actually see the specter. So, for example, if I wanted to make something up as if someone was cursing me, I could claim that I could see somebody, but no one else could verify that because the specter's purpose was only to curse or to perpetrate just that one person who could actually see it. So spectral evidence had been used against those who were accused in Europe during their witch trials, but a lot of times that sort of evidence was taken in caution, and so it really wasn't seriously looked upon as accurate evidence. But in Salem, Massachusetts, for some reason, the officials relied a lot on spectral evidence and believed many times that when one of the girls had claimed that a specter had visited them, they actually did come and visit them. So as names were being named, they eventually were able to start holding court cases in the summer of 1692. And the first court case was against Bridget Bishop, who was convicted and later hanged. So the spot where they're going to hang all these witches and wizards is going to be called Witches' Hill. There's a picture of Bridget Bishop being hanged. The second case, there are 5 more women who were brought to trial. 4 are convicted, and later they're going to be put to death. One of the 5 is not convicted originally. Rebecca Nurse was one of the nursemaids of the court, of the village, and she was declared innocent, but the judge disagreed with the court's ruling and pressured the court to reverse their charge, and eventually Rebecca Nurse was also convicted. So those original 5 women, eventually all 5 of them are also convicted. And on July 19th, all of them went to Witches' Hill and were executed. Now there were some within the village who resisted conviction, and so they didn't go along with the proceedings of the court. An example of that is Giles Corey, whose wife was executed, and so whenever he was brought into court, he wouldn't follow along with the proceedings, and because of that, the punishment is called pene forte et dure, which means you're going to be crushed by heavy weight. And the way that they do that is they lie the person down on a flat board and put a board on top of them, and then they start placing extremely heavy stones on them until they're eventually crushed to death. And it said that Giles Corey's last words as they were asking him to eventually confess to being a wizard, he would never confess, but instead ask for more weight. And then Sarah Good was another example of a person who resisted conviction and basically was cursing everybody as she was going up to Witch's Hill. And her final words are that if you take my life away, God will give you blood to drink. So anyway, some of the people who were supposedly guilty of being witches ended up confessing or admitting to the guilt of being a witch in order to avoid death. Because if you never admitted to your guilt, then it seemed as if you were going to be proved as being guilty anyway, and you were going to be put to death. So they, in order to avoid death, they said, yes, I am a witch. And so the Puritan court claimed that if you are truly sorry for this, then you would give us evidence of other people who are witches too. And so in order to follow through with that guilty claim, people started naming other names of witches, or supposed witches, I should say, within the village. And so by then, we have more convictions, more hangings. Later that summer, one of the 6 convictions, one person was spared, Elizabeth Proctor, because she was pregnant at the time of her conviction, and so they wanted her to go through the term of her pregnancy and then kill her after she gave birth to a child. That way he or she would be spared. While all this is happening, again, more names are being named. There's 100 more suspects in jail, and people are starting to realize that this is getting out of hand. So one of the lead court magistrates ends up resigning. There are church ministers across Massachusetts who are writing to the court that's presiding over this in Salem to think about what they're doing. And even one of the most respected ministers within Massachusetts, Increase Mather, writes a message and sends it to all the ministers of the court, and explaining that it's better to save an innocent person's life and risk one person getting away with being a witch than to kill an innocent person. So a lot of historians wonder why all of this hysteria came about during Salem. And one of the first historians who looks at this, and this happens almost right after the trials, is Thomas Hutchinson. And he focuses on the motivation of the accusers. And in the end, claims that most of this is just because the girls who had all started it were trying to find a way to get attention or get back at other people who had made them angry within the village. And so this is a way that they were able to get that attention and get the things that they wanted from the village. And it was kind of a power struggle that they were able to figure out how to manipulate for themselves. Now, after this was published, other historians said, yeah, we can see how that would make sense, but what about the adults who know better, who shouldn't have gone along with kids, who could figure out that kids were just playing around? And what about those things that seem stranger than fits? Because some of the accounts from Salem show that people had a hard time explaining some of the physical symptoms that people were exhibiting, and there's no sort of way to act those things out. So, people fainting within the courts, that would be an extremely hard thing to act out whenever, they could see that breathing had become shallow and things like that. Some other explanations behind the witch hysteria. Historians looked into psychiatric research, and some of the things that they showed is that if someone is really, really fearful of their life, some strange physical abnormalities may come about because of the stress that is put on your mind, due to the fact that kids who lived in Salem probably really did have this genuine fear of the devil because of the role that religion played within their society. And so if they thought that the devil was real and he could be walking around on this earth, then why wouldn't it be the case that witches were trying to, curse them or put spells on them or things like that. And so then that unconscious fear led into these physical abnormalities. And some say, well, it could have been a combination of a couple of those things. Those kids could have been acting and then could have also had some real fears. But what about the magistrates who are in charge of the courts? Why would they continue to have these strange proceedings where if someone confessed to being a witch, they were spared their life, and those who wouldn't confess and who were actually probably telling the truth were put to death anyway, with the reasoning behind if they were put to death, then their souls were saved because they never even ended up lying to begin with. Also, some of the people who were put to death versus a slave who was spared, and a slave at that time was considered someone who wasn't as important. Tituba was saved, and some of them were concerned over the fact that her status was so low within society, but they decided to save her life anyway. Another explanation is that some historians, Boyer and Nissenbaum, have plotted where the accusers and the accused lived within Salem Village. And so when they plotted out all the accusations and those who were accused of being witches, it showed that the majority of those who were accusing lived in the western part, and then those who were being accused of being witches or wizards lived in the eastern part. And so that correlation shows that there could have been a division between the two areas within Salem. Different types of people lived in each area. Maybe certain members of or a higher class lived in one area versus another. One area was considered more like a merchant class area, while another was considered agrarian. And those differences may have caused some people to believe that they could use this power struggle to gain an advantage over a certain area within Salem. So another explanation too is that if you look at the history of Salem, as the town grows, the village wants to, town of Salem and Salem Village are actually two separate places when you look at how everything is drawn out. And eventually the village wanted to break away from the town, and many of the people who lived within the town didn't want that, because that's a loss of tax income that would come to the town that would pay for a lot of the things that were happening inside there. And so that power struggle between those two groups of people could have caused a spark in accusations, trying to get people to do what they wanted them to do by accusing them of being a witch and then facing the consequences of that. Also, there's a division within the town over the choice of a minister, and the minister changed relatively often within the community. And as you can see, there's different men who are in charge of the ministry over these various years, and it goes back and forth between which side of town wants which minister. So the east side gets their choice, and the west side drives him out and they get their choice, and then vice versa, back and forth. And so and then some say it's those who have a commercial lifestyle versus those who have a farming lifestyle. The old farmers felt like they were being threatened by new ways of earning money coming into their village, and so that could be a reason, the division between them over why people are being accused of being witches. Another explanation is there's a new type of religion that has moved into the area too. Quakers started preaching this idea that you could have a direct correlation or relationship with God, and the evidence of that is you could physically see people getting revved up by religion. And so Puritans may have felt threatened by the Quakers because more people were interested in having a personal relationship versus having to go to the church and go through a minister in order to, have their religion, or to get teachings or lessons or things like that. And so the strange new turn or twist on religion had some people a little concerned. And there were, recordings of people talking about Quakers, how they would actually physically shake whenever they were taken over by the spirit. And so if that was the case, then some may have been fearful over this kind of being like a cult movement type thing. Also, a lot of the people who are accused are women. If you look at it, it's three out of four generally are women. And if a man is accused of being a witch or a wizard, it's because they're guilty by association. So, for example, Giles Corey was accused of being a wizard, but his wife had earlier been sentenced to death for being a witch, and so that's probably why he was targeted next. And during the trials, they're treated a lot differently. They're not allowed to defend themselves as much. Their word isn't taken. Their word is taken for granted or lightly because they are women, and men had kind of a stronger role within society. Also, any woman who kind of was self-sufficient, she was targeted as well, because an independent woman was seen as a threatening thing during this time period when men had strong roles within society. So someone who didn't show subordination, someone who also was relatively educated. So Giles Corey's wife, Martha Corey, had lots of books in her house, and for some that was the reason she was suspected of being a witch, is because she had all these strange books within her home and she was well read. Some in the end want to know which is the cause of all this. Notice the play on words, which is it. And I think most historians have decided that it's probably a combination of several of these factors. And when you look into it a little bit more deeply, that's probably how this outbreak ended up becoming such a phenomenon within Salem, Massachusetts.